Well, my name is Tim Sandage. I'm a senior security partner strategist with AWS, and I'm struggling with that title because I just moved from our security compliance team a couple of weeks ago, so I'm trying to get used to my new title. But at any rate, we're here to talk to you about compliance in the cloud and secure by design. I've also got Hamath with me from Rent-A-Center. He's also going to do a customer use case and illustrate how they've used these processes and so forth to be PCI compliant in the cloud. So we're going to go through that today. We got a couple of demos. We'll try to keep it lively. But also, if you got questions, you got comments, please interject, because we don't want to be the only ones up here talking. It's about learning how do we go down this path of security and compliance in the cloud. So with that, one of the things that has occurred over the last few years, and how many people here are security practitioners? So one of the things that's really evolved, especially in the cloud and in the mobility connected world, is complexity is increasing, but we're still following security frameworks that were, you think about Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, some of those original frameworks came out, 1999, 2002, they didn't know what the cloud was when they were creating those frameworks. So now we've got this complexity of how do we become secure and compliant within the cloud? How do we make sure that we're able to get through these different standards, look at the policies and procedures. And so when you think about it, I always call it the 80-20 rule. You can really only solve security compliance with about 20% technology, and the rest is administrative and operational burden. So you're writing a policy and hope somebody reads it and follows it, right? Am I correct? I just said I heard the phone. I'm like, I had a phone ring on myself one time in a presentation, so at least it wasn't me today. But so the opportunity is for AWS is really how do we modernize governance and technology, compliance within the cloud? Because we've got to get away from this, 20% of technology implementation to solve a 100% problem. We've got to figure out how do we operationalize through technology advances that the cloud provides to actually, create the ability to actually hold accountable a policy statement or a procedure statement within the cloud. Because as you can see, how many people got free credit reporting last year for a breach? Come on, I know more of you did than that. I got about 10. So obviously you think about the governance process that we have going today isn't really working. So we've got to figure out a way to actually optimize and look at ways to leverage the cloud, leverage the capabilities that an API security model and infrastructure as code capability actually provide for us. But then we get into the next piece. The greatest thing about AWS is its flexibility. The greatest thing about AWS is its complexity. So we always have customers come to us and go, yeah, I need to put regulated workloads in the cloud, but I don't really, they ask these questions, well, what are the regulatory requirements? Do you have a fit for purpose type service? What's the scope and the boundaries for, my regulated workload that I'm moving into the cloud? And so we're struggling with these questions because it's like the answer always is in AWS, it depends. Because we have some great services with a lot of flexibility, but you have different ways to remediate security risks within the cloud. And so that's kind of the piece that we really started to look at is how do we solve this? How do we start getting in front of this? Because the other piece, and you'll hear from Hamath later here in the presentation, is DevOps is so excited and they're out there spinning up services, turning on Amazon machine images, launching databases, the whole 9 yards, and they're not necessarily always in tune with the security process. Because you think of it, how many people have ever done a risk assessment? What's the average that it takes for a risk assessment? Forever. The average, the industry average in a full risk assessment is 12 to 18 months. You got a DevOps guy that's over here doing 20 changes a day. How is your risk assessment going to keep up? So the concept is we got to come up with a security by design capability. We've got to look at how do we build security in from the minute you set up a root account within your AWS environment and leverage the AWS security services, the partner ecosystem that AWS offers to really go through and figure out, okay, leading practices, I should set up root, I should lock it down with, multi-factor authentication, I should set up some processes to make sure I have administrative access in there, and really build out my least privilege concept. But that's something that you got to be programmatic, about in front of your DevOps. You've got to make sure that it's in place before your DevOps environment starts going, hey, I'm snapping out, machines, I'm putting up data sets, I'm putting up data containers, you got to have all this stuff built in. So we came up with this process, and we kind of stole it from the quality by design concept, really the medical trials environment, because it's really, how do you build in a quality-based security approach into everything that you do within your environment? And so that was the concept. But we also didn't want to limit it to just things within AWS, because how many people know about our partner ecosystem? We've got a pretty powerful, ecosystem out there, and in some cases the customers already have a fit-for-purpose service that they're using on-prem, and they want to extend that into their environment. So that was the other thing, is that we wanted to make sure that we created some design principles around how do we integrate the AWS security services, compliance services, non-security related services, and make sure that they're actually fit for purpose for building in a security by design ecosystem. And really thinking about one of the big things that people don't want to admit to, but you need to plan for breach in your security planning process. You need to realize that there is a potential that someday, no matter how good I am as a security professional, I could get breached. So I've got to plan for auto healing, I got to plan for breach, I got to plan for fault tolerance. But the great thing about the cloud is you now can treat infrastructure as code. I can go out and I can build modular capabilities around security practices, constrain them in things like our service catalog, and actually set them up so that my administrator or my organization, whether it's DevOps or it's my traditional network administrators, server administrators, whatever, they can deploy a secure environment by default because you've designed it in as a capability in your service catalog. So you're not limiting business, because what's the number one thing that you don't want to be the security guy or gal that's the no at the meeting, because guess what? You don't get invited back. So security's got to be a business enabler, but we also got to make sure that we're remediating and treating risk as it is deployed within the environment. So like I said, we've been building this security by design ecosystem using a lot of new existing core security capabilities and non-security capabilities in AWS, but then we've also been seeking out fit-for-purpose security partners and so forth, or even non-security partners that have a great story around what are they doing and and being able to help support that ecosystem. So we've got a few of them up here. Evan&IO, we've been working with the Center for Internet Security, creating benchmarks around it. How many people have heard about our new benchmarks that just came out? So we've got a lot of things that are going on around that, and then we're putting in other partners like Allgress. We'll demo them. They're a governance, risk, and compliance tool that resides in AWS, and that gives you the ability to actually map out that shared responsibility of controls. I mean, sure, you don't necessarily need a tool for that. You can do a spreadsheet, but it's one of those other pieces is how do we automate some of this? And then because of the API technology in the cloud, now you've got the ability to use an AWS API, an Evan&IO API, or a Splunk API, or any number of APIs out there, and report against a very specific control capability. Maybe you're trying to be PCI compliant, maybe you're trying to be HIPAA compliant, whatever the case may be. So I think I've probably already covered this, but why? I mean, the reason why we're doing this is you're not going to be successful with cloud security and compliance if you don't automate, if you don't look at ways to add and work with efficiencies, because there's a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot of things going on. And as I said, our traditional governance model isn't necessarily working. I mean, as evident, I look back at 2015, I call it the year of the breach. You look at the 267 health organizations that got listed on the wall of shame, and you look at the PCI, breaches, and you look at the OPM breaches. Like I said, I mean, I got at least 10, credit reporting notifications last year just by the breaches that I was associated with. So the concept of what we're really trying to get to is really the goal is how do we get to a truly prevent and detect control? Yeah, maybe I can't create a technology control around somebody going in and trying to violate my password policy by, and I still can't believe that people do this, but they do. You've got a 10 iteration of a password, and they sit there and they change their password 10 times to get back to the I love cats password that they want to retain. So the cloud allows you, using a service like config rules to go in there and say, great, I've got my account settings to set my password complexities and my timing, but now I can create a config rule that says the user can't change their password more than once in a 30-day cycle. So maybe I can kind of mitigate, that crazy user activity of going through and wanting to use the exact same password. But I really have to have a logical process to go through this. And so I'm not going to go through all this, but I read through this for a minute. I'll take a breath and maybe get a glass of water, but read through this and kind of then tell me, what do you think the most difficult piece of this cycle is? Anybody? Like I said, I don't want to be the only one talking today. All of it. I'm right there with you. 4, to get certified? Yeah, that's pretty, 2. Yeah, rationalize. I mean, when you think about it, the heavy lift is in block 2 and 3. It's like, how many people have more than one regulated workload within their scope and environment? Yeah, makes the audit impossible. Or you could do like a lot of people where they're, hey, you got auditor coming in for PCI, then you got FedRAMP, then you got HIPAA, whatever the case may be. But now add that. And how many people are all in on the cloud today? How many people are hybrid? They got some on-prem, they're doing some cloud. How many people are doing multi-cloud and on-prem? Probably a large majority. So now all of a sudden, how complex do your governance become now? Because now you're rationalizing what are the different controls, what are the different data protections that you have to go through, and then how do you make sure that, I've got deployments in AWS, maybe I've got deployments in another cloud, and maybe I've got, deployments on-prem. Well, now how do I create my security policies, procedures to make sure that they're fit for purpose for all those environments and that they make sense for all of your customer or user base? So that's why we came up with this piece, is how do we really modernize that? But then the next thing is, we need to get off the things like how many people do compliance and security through Excel spreadsheets? Most of us, right? We got to get away from some of that because we've got to be able to automate that. We've got to get to a continuous monitoring capability or a continuous risk management capability. And again, the cloud allows that because you're dealing with, security as code or infrastructure as code, really. And so that's where, as I said earlier, I kind of mentioned that we started partnering with the CIS benchmarks, and we created and released it at RSA, was our first foundation benchmark. And it really is 44 different security lockdown capabilities around setting up the account design. So literally going in, setting up root, setting up 2 administrators. I'm locking down, password complexities. I'm locking down, my putting MFA on all of my, privileged accounts. I'm putting MFA on all of my user accounts. I'm taking the keys out of, my root account and so forth. And it's a logical way to go through and design your account, and it's scoreable. So when you come out of this at the end state, how many people are familiar with CIS benchmarks? I guess that's probably a first question. So the great thing about the benchmarks is each one of them have a score. So you can come out of this if you go, because some of the things you may not need or want to do within your environment, but you have a scoreable output that says, okay, I've got an 80% factor against this, security leading practice, which now backwards compatibles to multiple frameworks. So maybe it's, maybe it's PCI, whoop, I went too far. Maybe it's PCI, maybe it's HIPAA, maybe I'm a FedRAMP or FISMA, government, entity. Now I've done this single lockdown and leading practice of security, but now it backward compatibles to all those different frameworks that we may have in a regulated work environment. So as you can see, the foundation benchmark is the one that's been published. It came out on I believe it was 29 Feb, the first day or the day before, RSA kicked off. And then we created a compatibility config rules repository on GitHub. And so now actually not only can you go through and forward deploy using CloudFormation templates, some of these leading practices, you can actually use our config rules. How many people are familiar with config rules? So you can actually use config rules and deploy these scripts that basically go in and then validate. And you can set these validations up on a continuous stream. Maybe you want to do it every hour. Maybe you want to do it once a day, whatever the case may be, so that you now start getting to that continuous monitoring or risk management capability. And so the other one that we're working on right now is the 3-tier web architecture. And so the great thing about CIS Benchmarks, and this is a plug for them, and not so much because they're in the room, but, but the great thing about it's consensus based. This isn't Tim's opinion that's creating this. It's anybody in this room can sign up and help us build these. And so it's something that I really encourage, especially if you're, working in AWS and working with our technologies. This is a way to really create a consensus-based security approach and make sure that we're doing things that not only make sense for a leading practice, but they're also supporting what you're doing in your environments. And I know this is kind of an eye chart, it's just meant to be that, but it's basically taking the different benchmarks that we've created and mapping across all of the major elements out there. As you can see, it's got FFIEC, it's got the Data Protection Act in Europe, it's got HIPAA, it's got FISMA, it's got PCI, and so you can see how it directly maps and does a crosswalk for you within the environment. So with that, if you can switch over to the other screen. Like I said, we also have a fit-for-purpose GRC partner that we've been working with, and they've set up the ability to go through. Again, like I said, you can do this through through spreadsheets, but the nice thing what they've done is, and I realize it's pretty hard to see. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Better? So what they've done is they've actually went in and they've broken down the, I'm using PCI as an example, so they've broken down, the percentage of controls within PCI that are shared between AWS, below the hypervisor, and above. Everybody familiar with our shared security responsibility model, I guess, before I go too far? So, in the cloud, everything's a shared responsibility. I don't care if you're doing a software as a service or an infrastructure as a service. There's a shared security responsibility between the customer and the cloud service provider. So what we've done here is obviously we have to do a lot of the same things a customer has to do, but below the hypervisor. So we do a lot of supporting things that support your adherence to, different control frameworks. So that's what this is broken down. But then also, you get to leverage a lot of the data center capabilities because obviously, physical security or environmentals or maintenance type controls are something that AWS has to do. And so we can go through here and we can see, it's basically a logical way to go through and say, okay, these are the requirements of the controls, and I can go in here and I can use this tool to actually document how I fit, the intent of the controls using AWS services and configurations, and then you can actually start tying in different things. Like right now, this is talking about how we set up subnets and firewall rules, and so what we did as a demo is I actually added our CloudFormation templates in here. So you can see this is now my configuration management of my automated deployment of how I deploy, security groups, subnets and so forth within my AWS environment. So, and this is something that the other piece of this is actually you can set this up through an API call also within your account. You can actually pull that data live, as I said, going back to, leveraging the AWS APIs or some of our partner APIs. You can actually go and pull these configs real time. So you actually use a tool where it's able to actually, keep updated and monitor what's going on in the environment 365 rather than that point in time or period in time where you're going through a PCI audit or you're going through a SOC audit or whatever the case may be. So it's really the idea is, we're getting to that point where we're starting to be able to deploy some of those prevent and detect controls to really automate security compliance in the cloud. So, but I won't go too far into that. I'm going to give Heyman a chance to come up here. So if you can switch back to the other piece, I'm going to switch it over to him and let him tell you the story how they leverage these processes within Rent-A-Center. So with that, you've got the floor, my friend.
All right. All right, thanks, Tim. Am I live? Yep. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Amazon, for allowing me the opportunity to go through and explain the journey of evolution of security at Rent-A-Center. My name is Hemant Jayaraman. I'm the Director of DevOps at Rent-A-Center, and this is a short explanation, goes in with what Tim has said, how we took a lot of the security by design principles and approached that on a lot of the projects that we're working on at Rent-A-Center. The core focus we started last year, where we had to build a secure B2B portal for our Acceptance Now business unit, which is being primarily used by our partners to grow their business. And as this is a highly secure B2B portal, they had a lot of PII data, a lot of PCI compliance requirements. And one of the principles we took, we partnered with Flux7, one of the key partners, which enabled us take some of the security by design principles and start implementing that using their security first framework. They've also been instrumental in helping us enabling DevOps philosophies at Rent-A-Center. This is a high-level overview on the architecture we put in place for this application that we built on Amazon last year. As you see, a lot of this from a security by design perspective, we built out this entire environment based on our three pillars, which is security, availability, and innovation. And the way we did this is, as you can see, we split the accounts and the VPCs by the application. So we put all the production application-related data in a production VPC and a separate account, all the security-related events in a security VPC, and we had a shared services VPC, which is connected to our corporate office, which we enable a lot of our automation and a lot of our access methodologies from the shared services VPCs. You don't see there's a separate VPC, you don't see that in this diagram, which talks about our lower level environments. We're also segregated in a separate VPC and a separate account. The first pillar, security, when we used a standard Amazon RDS, which helped us because of automated patching, satisfy a lot of the compliance requirements there in terms of using the RDS as a service. We also use centralized logging from Alert Logic and threat management also from Alert Logic in the security VPC to satisfy that principle. The second pillar is availability. The way we consider availability is part of security, right? A highly available system with no single point of failure. Also with very minimal human intervention. Every layer was separated using ELBs, and all of them auto-scale independently. The last pillar is innovation. Going back to Tim's point on how the environments were built, everything was templatized. We use CloudFormation templates. We also built the AMIs and the OS and the application stack using Ansible. So everything was scripted. A lot of the automation that went in, we used Jenkins. So satisfying some of the core principles of security using templatized design as we go from lower level dev environment all the way to production. Some of the key benefits of this approach is usually most of us in this room have done traditional operations. Security, we run into a lot of the security issues only in production. It's always, just before go live, you have this, everybody scrambling. But with this approach of building things templatized, going through automation, we had no surprises before go live. We knew what we were getting into. If we got into that situation, it happened in the lower level environment, and we're not seeing them for the first time in production. We followed standard principles of least privilege access in terms of how we had access to the various components in that architecture. As Tim mentioned, we used MFAs for root access and things like that. From a logging perspective, that's one of the key components of our security by design approach is we enabled centralized logging for all the application and OS events. We used Elk Stack in our case. From an encryption, it was encryption in motion for data in rest and data in motion. And going back to the DevOps principles and how we build this environment, everything was built as code. So there was no person going in and clicking on the console and spinning up a machine. That was one of the key elements. And for the first time in our company, DevOps engineers actually checked in the infrastructure components into our source code management system. So it was a big win for us. And we used, from a compliance perspective, same thing as Tim mentioned, you can turn on your CloudFormation templates or your Ansible playbooks as build docs when you have auditors asking how this environment was built. Going forward, as we journey this approach from last year where we build new projects this year, we're continuing down the security by design approach. We're planning to use AWS CloudTrail, AWS WAF to a lot of the components that we use. We're also going to use the Cis Benchmarks AMIs, which will help us make sure that everything is baked, security is baked right from the get-go. And Docker, use of Docker to basically reduce the attack vectors, right? When everything is containerized, the only thing you're exposing in the application, you automatically minimize a lot of the security threats at the OS level and below. From key management, using RDS, Aurora, would be a very important factor there. That helps us use key rotation. A lot of us use key management and everything, but very often there's very little key rotation that goes on in the enterprise. With using KMS, it helps us automate some of that, automate our key rotation, which is very important in all of the encryption we do. And for DDoS protection, use of CDN also helps us with DDoS protection. Any questions on what we've done so far? Nope. All right, thank you. Tim, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, sir. So kind of in review, I know we talked about a lot today and we gave you some use case examples, but really, what security by design is about is really creating a repeatable process around, how do I go through and design my security architecture in front of DevOps? And again, so that's one of our foundation principles that I've talked to, you heard from Hemeth, is it CloudFormation templates is really the key, is you're really able to script your infrastructure as code. And you can take, and in our case, we've got some ones that we've modeled against the CIS benchmarks around. We've got an access, CloudFormation template. We've got a resource access control template. We've got an operating system and security environment template, and then we've got an application layer template. And so we combine those together and we create what's called a stack. So you have the ability to then deploy them individually or deploy them as a complete deployment methodology. Within your environment. But then the next thing is package those up and align those with the instances and the other resources that you may need. If you've got partner capabilities, that you want to pull in as far as packaging through a quick start or through a direct deployment, you can also code those capabilities into, these CloudFormation templates and stacks. And then you go in and you constrain them in Service Catalog. How many people have a Service Catalog right now in their on-prem organization? Everybody has, these are the preferred operating systems, the preferred applications and so forth. What's no different in the cloud, but now all of a sudden you've codified it. You've basically codified your security. You go in and you can constrain that, and then you can actually go in and add additional constraints or resource permissions around those, who can deploy these Service Catalog capabilities. How many people run more than one AWS account ID? So the same thing, too, is in Service Catalog. How many people are familiar with Service Catalog, I guess, first? The great thing that I just love, especially for, multi-accounts within an organization, is that you can create up a, what I call kind of a, managed service account or, an MSO, where you can actually set up a constrained environment for Service Catalog, and then all of your sub-accounts within your organization, maybe you've got a sub-business unit that's operating and doing different things, you can make them subordinate of that account in Service Catalog, and then the only way they can deploy is now based on your governance and your security model and so forth. So that's something that, I really encourage if, that's kind of the key of elements here is how to set up the security by design is really looking at how can you go through and make sure that you can leverage some of these resources and then leverage some of our partners and so forth. Because one of the things, once you get this deployed properly, it's a matter of how do you report on it? How do you go in and tell management, hey, these are our success and failures and areas of improvement. The one thing that I always joke with people is that how many people are familiar with CloudTrail JSON log files have seen that's not exactly something you're going to walk into your C-level suite and say, hey, look at how good we are. This is a JSON code. So obviously that's where some of our partners come into play of integrating, Splunk and some of the other capabilities. So, and as you can see here, Splunk fully integrates with a lot of our core services, and now you can do executive level reporting, you can do executive level event management capabilities, response activities, and so forth. And so, again, it's another great, partner as far as our partner ecosystem to really help you down this journey of really creating a secure by design environment. And these are just some more, screenshots and so forth of some of the capabilities that they have. I know it's kind of an eye chart in here. But ultimately what we're getting to is how do we go through and automate governance? Like I said at the beginning, the number one goal is to create, prevent, and detect controls. I want to be able to make sure that, I've got a clear path to be able to cut down on that 80-20 factor. I mean, my most immediate goal is getting things down to where I got 50% of my operational administrative processes that have either prevent or detect control in the cloud. And it honestly is there. It's just a matter of deploying it and making sure that, your community, your organization and so forth accepts some of these things. I mean, one of the things that is interesting, especially with config rules, is we actually now, for the first time ever, have a way to do auto remediation using config rules. But guess what? It freaks people out. They go, yeah, I don't, if I launch a PCI server, without putting the proper tagging on it, we have a config rule right now that says isolate that. I can isolate that if you don't follow all of my security and governance processes. But the minute you tell people, it's like, hey, somebody in DevOps deployed a compliant resource, they get freaked out. It's like, yeah, but if I isolate it, now I'm going to have management breathing down my neck. Yeah, but if it gets compromised, aren't you going to have a bigger problem? So that's the key, is that we've got to change some of those mindsets, is that you've got the capability, or you can actually just create a config rule that remediates the problem. Maybe they just forgot tagging, and tagging has to be implemented on any PCI asset that has card data environment elements in it. Just apply the tag and then send a reactionary note to, using simple notification service to the administrator that deployed that, said, hey, by the way, you forgot XYZ step. But now you got some really real-time prevent and detect capabilities that you can make sure that you stay secure all the time, and you're starting to tie that governance model to automation. The same thing as Heath said, using the automation capabilities around CloudFormation templates and service catalog. One of the approaches they're doing is that they're doing, traditional patch management and so forth, and those are great, but there's also other things, especially using CloudFormation templates, of doing a rip and replace, because you can do version control within service catalog. You can say, okay, I got a deployment cycle, or, Patch Tuesday came out on, from a Microsoft operating system. Well, rather than patching it, maybe I just deploy the next iteration that's been updated, and I just, change my service catalog versioning control, and that's how I do, automate my configuration management within my environment. I don't have these cab processes that I got to go through and ask and beg for for a deployment cycle. I just become automated within my deployment processes. And then automate security. Every place that you can possibly automate security, you want to look for fit for purposes, whether it's directly within AWS or it's through some of our key partners. I mean, that's one of the key elements for AWS, is it we know that we have a lot of great capabilities, that are complex and flexible to do a lot of the things that you need to do within your environment. But we also know that you like to use, some of the things that you're already using on-prems, or you've already invested in licensing around things like Fortinet and, and Trend Micro or Symantec or whatever. So you have those abilities and those resources that you want to use, that you can now actually make sure that you automate some of those partner integrations within the environment. And then obviously, really what we're trying to get to is that continuous compliance. We've got a few partners and customers that we're working with where it's like, we're actually wanting to challenge our auditors to say, come in any day of the week through 365 days and audit me. Let's not do that point in time, period in time compliance exercise. Let's make sure that we're fit for compliance day in and day out, that we have that ability. And then all of a sudden, audit cycles don't become a percentage element of a 10% factor of your environment over a single point in time or a single period of time. It becomes a continuous 100% life cycle capability. And so, the ultimate goal is really, how do you improve security and stay that way? So that's what you're getting to. So the takeaway is really, making sure that you have reliable technical implementations of operational and administrative capabilities within your environment. I mean, the cloud really is something for the first time. I mean, I've been in security about 20 years, and it's like, this is really one of those places where I can finally actually see being able to implement some of these processes. But it's a cultural change, it's a fit for purpose, trying to identify what is native in AWS that can be leveraged, what are the things that you can leverage from partners, and some of the, thinking outside the box, making sure that you're actually looking for capabilities to automate and get to that real-time risk management piece. So with that was everything I had, but we wanted to make sure that we had some time for questions. We've got a few resources up here, both from AWS and from some of our partners, but we still got some time. Actually, we did good today. See? You guys didn't have very many questions, so somebody's got to ask some questions now. Yes, sir?
How many customers do you have that are buttoned down as reticent? This sounds like what I want to be in this 2 years to get there.
Yeah, I mean, and
How many companies are actually doing that now?
there's you'd be surprised. I mean, because really now, when you start looking at, hey, how do I go and put, the regulated workloads into the cloud? I mean, these questions have got to be asked. I mean, they got to be asked up front. I mean, sure, we see people that do the run and crash and go, oh, how did I get here? And they have to do some re-architecting. That's the other reason why we're really getting in front of this and going out and, working with our partners, working with our customers, making sure that they're starting, with these resources that we've created. So it's a high percentage that are doing some really great things in security, but then they're also, one of the bigger factors is that they're doing it manually. And so now all of a sudden they're really secure, but they don't have an ability to iterate. So now we come in here with these automation capabilities, and now we give them, they can either fail fast or be secure fast. And that's the goal. It's like, because you're going to, you want to be able to fail fast, but you want to be able to recover.
So is this thing pretty programmatic at this point? If I go with compliance, what's the use case or guidance on how to get compliance or governance?
We've got a lot of stuff. We've got a web page around security by design. We've got a white paper. We're building more assets. We put out the GitHub repository, so we have a config rules GitHub repository that has has scripts and so forth that you can pull down that are directly related to the benchmarks. Obviously, we've got the benchmarks that are there. So, and then we've got people that are creating CloudFormation templates that are shareable that'll be up on the GitHub and so forth as well.
How new is this process?
We launched this, the Secure by Design concept was launched at reInvent last year in, October, November last year. So it's still, it's a community effort too. We're bringing in partners, we're bringing in customers, we're trying to get everybody to kind of help drive these concepts and principles. So, yes, ma'am.
In the banking industry, which I'm in,
Mm-hmm.
we have regulators and we get things online and all that. Are some of the regulators?
Yeah, so there's regulators that are, in AWS. Some of them are public, some of them are not public use cases that we can share. So you can actually, and I see one of our financial services person in the audience that can even speak to it better than I can. But we have some, regulators in. We've actually been doing outreach to regulators also to educate them. Same we've been doing with auditors too, because one of the things that's happening in this space is that auditors don't know cloud, so how do they come in and, because all of a sudden I get, E&Y or I get Deloitte calling us up going, we had to fail one of your customers because they didn't do this, this, and this. I'm like, no, you didn't understand the service. Let me help you understand the service so you can audit it. So those are other pieces that we're doing as well. So, yes, sir. exactly.
How realistic is it to give an auditor, here's the confirmation template, and then they say, yep, good to go?
Yeah, so, yeah, exactly right. So that's where I do a lot of road shows teaching auditors and security people. I actually do a 2-day auditing workshop for, the big 4 different consulting firms and so forth to say, I got to teach you, because a lot of times they're not even deep technical too. So now you say JSON and they go, Jason? And like, no, JSON. It's like, but, so, you really, there's there's still a lot of education in this space, especially on that side. But then also making sure that we show, purposes, things like that. We still see customers going in like, hey, they're doing snippet screenshots of their environment. It's like, no, take your CloudFormation template, make it into a PDF, and that's your configuration management evidence for 15 controls, depending on what framework you choose.
Would you say it's feasible to do in the upcoming audits?
Yeah, but I think the number one thing, and I always tell people, have a sit down with your auditor before you start getting, you need to come down to, working with, the auditor. If you have, like Flux 7 worked with Rent-A-Center, they weren't the QSA, but they were the assessor, the builder for, in conjunction with Rent-A-Center. And so then at that point, then you have a QSA come in and you've got to make sure that they understand, how you did the deployments, find, and PCI is a perfect example, is find QSAs that, understand the cloud, because I've talked to a few that like, oh, cloud's insecure, they're just doing the FUD, the FUD piece of like cloud's insecure, but you got to find those right people that, that you can educate and have the conversation with.
Do you have customer use cases where it's been HIPAA compliance audited and passed?
Let's see, and yeah, so HIPAA's a tough one because it's not a third-party audit. I mean, there are customers that are doing High Trust, which is a certification that's a third-party related to HIPAA and so forth. And we, but I don't know. I don't necessarily. I'll have to follow up if we haven't necessarily a use case where they've done that. We have organizations that are running HIPAA compliant workloads, and we sign BAAs with those customers, and we work with them to go through the security. The security and privacy elements of HIPAA and so forth. But it's HIPAA is a self-assess, it's a self-certification basically. So, yeah, but we have a lot of, HIPAA workloads on AWS right now. So, if they've got a public use case, that's kind of our thing. I can go in and, if you go out to our compliance website, there's a lot of different use cases related to regulatory environments, whether it's HIPAA, PCI, CJIS, FFIEC. There's different use cases that we already have out there. I've written a lot of white papers out there, or done joint white papers with partners and so forth, like our FFIEC. White paper and workbook was written with an audit firm. We did a PCI one with a QSA and so forth. So we're pretty active in this space, making sure that we try to educate, but there's always more to do. So, yes, sir.
It's actually a question about the Rent-A-Center slide.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed that there's something interesting that kind of traffic funneled into a security VPC,
Mm-hmm.
like everything.
Yes.
Can you kind of elaborate, like that kind of, like most people kind of do like a security, like a secure account.
Correct.
Right here, you can have like an account to talk into your other.
Correct. So from a segregation, right? So our security team manages the security VPC, and we do VPC peering. A lot of the security components which are there, the threat manager and log manager, they sit in that VPC. Traffic, it still has your ELBs and everything, but traffic is flowing through that VPC peering back to the actual production application. So basically, it is designed in such a way that you segregate the two. When you have performance issues or whatever, you can easily find out where the issue is.
And that approach, I mean, it's the same. It's the same thing. Not only do we do VPC isolation between management, dev, and prod, then you also have the AZ failover to those. Because you think about like FSMA as a perfect example, security services have to be isolated from management services or from production. And so this is another way. PCI is the same way. They've got isolation principles. Plus it really supports that least privilege concept of prod should be the least, accessible environment, especially in a PCI environment. You got all your card data and stuff. have security doing patch management out of the security VPC based on a trust between, peering, and then, have your management piece also based on that. So it's hitting least privilege, isolation, and then supporting compliance and security capabilities in your environment.
So just to add to that is we also have where we have a shared services VPC, which talks about, again, for PCI compliance, not everybody has access to a lot of the environment. You have to go to a jump box that restricts your access methodology, and the way all the rules or security groups are set up is that jump box has access to various systems. So that's how basically it's a way to isolate traffic. So.
Yeah, plus you're isolating, we run the same way as it, my laptop, it's a dead box. It has nothing on it, even though any of our service teams, same principle. You go into a jump box, your tools, services, and capabilities, so you're isolating, what could be an infected box that you got people that are walking around like me in a hotel every night, connected to 20 different, Wi-Fi services and stuff. So it's that isolation piece that really creates that.